My name is Alexander Hayes, and until 6 months ago, I would have told you I lived a quiet, ordinary life. I was 42 years old, an accountant in Providence, Rhode Island, with a modest home, a stable job, and, most importantly, a family I cherished. My wife, Elena, was the center of our world. She had this laugh, warm, musical, the kind of laugh that filled every corner of our house with light. Our daughter, Sophia, 10 years old, had inherited Elena's bright eyes and endless curiosity. She carried a sketchbook everywhere, filling page after page with drawings of animals, houses, even our little family, smiling under the sun. Ethan, only 7, was a whirlwind of energy. He built forts out of toy blocks and blankets, defending his imaginary castles with a seriousness only a child could muster. I thought life, though unremarkable, was perfect. Each morning I'd kiss Elena goodbye at the door, ruffle Ethan's hair, and promise Sophia I'd bring her home new pencils or paper for her next creation. Those small routines, those moments, were everything to me. But life has a cruel way of shattering the ordinary. It was a rainy afternoon in spring, when everything I knew was taken from me. Elena had just picked up the children for Sophia's art class. I was at work, crunching numbers in the quiet of my office when the phone rang. I still remember the voice on the other end. It was calm, detached, almost too steady for the words it carried. There's been an accident. A semi-truck had skidded on the wet highway, slamming into their car. The officer said they didn't survive. I dropped the phone. My legs buckled, the room spun, and the sound of my own heartbeat thundered in my ears. Somehow, I made it to the hospital, clinging to the faint hope that the officer had been wrong. But under the harsh fluorescent lights, I was led to a cold room. 3 bodies lay covered in white sheets. I pulled them back one by one. Elena, Sophia, Ethan. My screams echoed down the sterile corridors. No amount of pleading, no amount of bargaining with God could change what I saw. The days that followed blurred together. The funeral came and went in a haze of black suits, umbrellas, and hollow condolences. I remember standing at the graveside, rain dripping from my hair, clutching the caskets as though holding on might bring them back. Elena's parents, Margaret and Harold Sinclair, were there too. They had always looked down on me, the middle-class accountant who, in their eyes, had stolen their daughter from the life of wealth she deserved. Margaret leaned close, her voice sharp as a blade. If you provided better for them, perhaps this wouldn't have happened. Her husband's glare said everything he didn't. I had no strength to argue. I turned away, and from that day forward, I severed all ties with them. Back at home, silence became my only companion. No more of Elena humming in the kitchen. No more of Sophia's giggles. No more of Ethan's playful shouts. Just the tick of the clock, the creak of the floorboards, and the weight of absence pressing down on me. I walked the halls of my house like a ghost, touching their belongings as if they might spring back to life. Therapy sessions, antidepressants, and long walks through empty streets became my routine. But no matter what I tried, the grief gnawed at me. I felt it in my body. Stomach cramps, fatigue, sleepless nights. But I told myself it was stress, nothing more. The world kept turning, and I had to keep working. Each morning, I stopped at a small cafe near my office. The barista, Sarah, always greeted me with a smile, and I would sit by the window with a steaming cup of black coffee. It became a ritual, a fragile thread of normalcy in a life unraveling. Then, 3 months after the funeral, an envelope arrived in the mail. It was from the insurance company. I opened it with trembling hands and found myself staring at a number that made no sense. $6 million. The policies on Elena and the kids had paid out. To anyone else, it might have felt like fortune. To me, it was blood money. I locked it away, whispering to myself that I'd use it one day to build a youth center Elena had dreamed of, a place where children could learn and laugh. That's when the phone calls started. Margaret first, her voice unnaturally sweet. Alexander, we've been thinking of you. Perhaps we can invest that insurance together, as family. Harold followed with his own version, a family plan. Alex will guide you through it. Their sudden kindness chilled me. For years they had treated me as if I were beneath them, and now they wanted to be partners. I brushed it off, but unease settled in my gut. Meanwhile, my health worsened. The cramps grew sharper. My heart raced without warning. Headaches pounded until I could barely see straight. Doctors shook their heads, chalking up the grief. They prescribed more pills, more rest. I wanted to believe them, but something inside me whispered otherwise. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when everything shifted. I was at the cafe, coffee in hand, staring out at the street when a boy approached. He looked no older than 12, clothes ragged, eyes wide with hunger. "Spare some change," he mumbled. Without thinking, I handed him a $20 bill. He pressed something into my palm before darting off into the crowd, a crumpled piece of paper. I unfolded it, and my blood ran cold. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were 5 words. "Don't drink that coffee. Poison." My hand froze on the cup. The steam rising from it suddenly felt sinister. My pulse thundered in my ears as I scanned the street. That's when I saw him, a hooded figure with a camera, snapping photos of me before disappearing into the crowd. I pushed the coffee aside and pocketed the note, my mind spinning. Was this a cruel prank? Or had I just been handed the key to everything? The unexplained sickness, the Sinclair sudden interest, the sense of being watched? That night in my empty house, I sat surrounded by family photos. Elena's smile, Sophia's drawings, Ethan's toys, all reminders of what I'd lost. My stomach churned, but this time it wasn't just pain. It was suspicion. Could Margaret and Harold really be behind this? Could their hatred and greed run that deep? It felt insane even to think it. And yet, the thought wouldn't let go. Desperate, I reached my phone and sent a message to the one person I trusted above all others, my father, Victor Hayes. He had spent his life as an FBI agent before retiring to a quiet suburb nearby. I told him everything, even the parts that sounded mad. He didn't laugh. He didn't tell me to calm down. He only wrote back, "Stay strong. I'll help, but we keep this quiet." That night, I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the note clutched in my hand. For the first time since losing my family, I felt something other than grief. I felt fear and a growing determination. Whatever was happening, I had to uncover the truth before it consumed me. The note never left my pocket. I must have unfolded it a dozen times that night, tracing every uneven letter with my finger, as if the truth might spill out of the ink itself. Don't drink that coffee. Poison. 5 words that turned my grief into a storm of paranoia. When morning came, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My face was pale, gaunt, the skin under my eyes bruised with exhaustion. I told myself it might all be in my head. Maybe the boy was mistaken. Maybe it was a cruel joke. And yet, my body's decline was undeniable. I decided to test it. The next day, I returned to the cafe, forcing myself to act normal. Sarah, the barista, smiled warmly. "The usual, Alex?" she asked, already reaching for a cup. My throat tightened. I nodded, feigning calm, though every nerve in me screamed to run. I sat by the window, as always, watching her prepare the coffee. When she handed it over, I forced a smile, then pretended to sip. Instead, I unscrewed the cap of a small vial I'd smuggled in my pocket, a leftover from an old travel kit, and discreetly poured a bit of coffee inside when no one was looking. My hand shook so badly I nearly spilled it. Tucking the vial away, I left abruptly. Sarah tilted her head at me as I rushed out, but I couldn't stay. I drove straight to my father's house. Victor Hayes had traded his FBI badge for a quiet retirement years ago, but his posture was still ramrod straight, his eyes sharp as ever. When I walked into his kitchen, I didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Dad," I said, pulling the vial from my pocket, "I think someone's poisoning me." His jaw tightened, but he didn't laugh, didn't scold me for paranoia. He simply took the vial in his steady hands, examining it with the precision of a man who'd spent decades studying evidence. "Tell me everything," he said. And so I did. The stomach pains, the headaches, the phone calls from Margaret and Harold, the boy with the note, the hooded figure outside the cafe. When I finished, Victor's expression was grim. "I'll have an old contact run this off the books," he said. No labs with red tape. But Alex, he fixed me with that piercing gaze I remember from childhood. If this is poison, it's deliberate, which means someone wants you gone. Those words chill me more than the note itself. The days that follow were torture. I cut off all outside food and drink, surviving on bottled water and simple meals I cooked myself. Slowly, the sharp edge of my symptoms dulled, as if whatever toxin was in my system was beginning to fade. The headaches weren't as brutal. My stomach eased. I wanted to believe it was coincidence, but the truth gnawed at me. On the 5th day, Victor called. His voice was tight with anger. "Come over. Now." When I arrived, he slid a printed report across the table. The name at the top leapt out like a death sentence. Thallium. I had heard of it only in passing, a word buried in crime shows. But Victor explained. Odorless. Tasteless. A favorite in old assassination cases. In small doses, it mimics stress and natural illness. Left unchecked, it kills slowly. And Alex, he pointed to the report, this was in your coffee. The world tilted. All the months of unexplained illness, the creeping fatigue. It wasn't grief alone. Someone had been poisoning me, drop by drop, waiting for me to waste away without suspicion. Victor leaned forward. This isn't random. This is calculated. And given the timing, the insurance money, the Sinclair sudden interest, I don't think it's coincidence. I wanted to deny it, to believe my in-laws, however cold, weren't capable of murder. But deep down, the pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Still, suspicion wasn't proof. We needed more. So I went back to the cafe, not to drink the coffee, but to watch. Hours passed, people came and went, and I waited by the window. Eventually, I spotted him, the boy who had given me the note. He was rummaging through a trash can in the alley nearby, his thin frame hunched against the autumn wind. I approached slowly, not wanting to scare him. "Hey," I said gently, "do you remember me?" His eyes widened, ready to bolt, but then recognition softened his features. "You're the coffee man." "That's me," I said with a weak smile. "You saved my life with that note." He shuffled his feet, hesitant. I overheard a guy paying one of the workers. Said to put something in the drink of a man who sits by the window. Wore a suit mid-40s. That sounded like you. I didn't want to see someone die. The simplicity of his words nearly broke me. This boy, with nothing in his pockets, had risked himself to save me. I asked his name. "Lucas," he mumbled. "Thank you, Lucas," I said, pulling out a sandwich and some cash. His eyes lit up with hunger more than greed. "I'll help you. I promise." Back at my father's house, I relayed everything. Victor's eyes narrowed with resolve. Good. Now we know it's coming from inside the cafe. That evening, we rented an old sedan and parked across the street, staking out the cafe like detectives in a crime drama. Hours ticked by until finally we saw it. A young worker I recognized, Ryan, slipping out the back door. He looked around nervously before meeting a hooded man in the alley. Money exchanged hands. Victor's camera clicked silently, capturing every detail. The next day, Victor confronted Ryan in that very alley. I watched from the car, my heart hammering. At first, Ryan denied everything, but Victor's presence, his voice still carrying the authority of decades in law enforcement, shattered his defenses. I didn't know it was poison. Ryan blurted, his hands shaking. The man said it was just something to make you tired. He paid me $3,000 each time. Victor's face was stone. Stay quiet. Keep working like nothing's wrong. If you tip them off, we'll make sure you're the one in handcuffs. With Ryan's confession, the last pieces fell into place. Someone had hired him to poison me. Someone wealthy enough to pay and ruthless enough to orchestrate it. Margaret and Harold Sinclair fit too perfectly. They're monsters. I whispered, rage boiling beneath my grief. Victor's reply was cold but steady. Then we set a trap. Over the next week, we transformed my home into a stage. Victor installed hidden cameras in picture frames and clocks, audio recorders in vases and bookshelves. I let my beard grow unruly, let my clothes hang loose, scattered pill bottles across the table. I called my boss, citing grave illness. And then, when the scene was set, I waited. It didn't take long. Margaret called, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We've heard you're unwell, Alexander. Let us visit. We're worried." I forced a weak cough. "All right, if you must." The night they arrived, my stomach twisted. Not from poison this time, but from dread. I lay on the couch in dim light, blankets around me, breathing shallow, pretending to fade. Margaret's eyes gleamed as she whispered to Harold, "He looks dreadful." They fussed over me with mock concern, offering tea, urging me to sign papers for my future. My hands trembled as I sipped just enough to sell the act. Then, at the perfect moment, I collapsed into the cushions, feigning unconsciousness. From beneath lowered lashes, I heard them whisper. "He won't last long," Margaret murmured. "The money will be ours soon enough. Thallium leaves no trace." Harold chuckled. "We'll forge what we need. The group will help." I texted one word to Victor, hidden under the blanket. "Now." Minutes later, sirens wailed outside. The night my in-laws were arrested, I thought I'd finally be able to breathe. For the first time since losing Elena and the kids, I felt a flicker of control, as if the nightmare was beginning to lift. But my father, Victor, warned me not to grow complacent. "Alex," he said quietly as we watched the police cruiser drive away with Margaret and Harold in the back. "This is bigger than them. They weren't acting alone." At the time, I didn't want to hear it. I wanted the story to end there, with justice neatly served and the villains locked away. But as the investigation unfolded, I realized my father was right. The police quickly tied Ryan's testimony to the Sinclair's bank accounts. Wire transfers, cash withdrawals, even notes scribbled on paper matched his claims. My health records, showing months of unexplained decline, became undeniable evidence of poisoning. But as detectives dug deeper, they found connections Margaret and Harold had to a shadowy group, an underground network that specialized in discreet killings, inheritance fraud, and forged documents. It was almost too sinister to believe, yet the pieces fit perfectly. The idea that my wife's parents had hired criminals to slowly erase me, just for money, made my stomach churn. And though investigators ruled Elena and the children's accident as genuine, I couldn't stop my mind from replaying the question. What if? Soon enough, the trial began. Providence's courthouse brimmed with reporters, lawyers, and curious citizens. I walked in each day with Victor by my side, my palms sweating, my heart pounding like a drum. Across the room sat Margaret and Harold. Gone were their polished airs of superiority. Margaret's hair was unkempt, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Harold still tried to hold his chin high, but even he looked worn, his tailored suit hanging loose around his frame. When the prosecutor played the recordings from my living room, the jury leaned forward in stunned silence. Margaret's voice dripped through the speakers, chilling and calculated. "Thallium leaves no trace. The money will be ours soon enough." Harold's words followed, equally damning. "We'll forge what we need. The group will help." I watched their faces as the evidence piled higher. Ryan's testimony, the lab results, the money trails. Every piece of the puzzle painted them not as grieving parents-in-law, but as predators, willing to sacrifice their own son-in-law's life for wealth. When my turn came to testify, I walked to the stand with trembling legs. But once I began speaking, the truth carried me forward. I told the jury about the day I lost Elena, Sophia, and Ethan, about the hollow silence in my home, the grief that turned my body into a prison. I described the stomach pains, the endless headaches, the hopeless nights where I thought death might be a release. And then I told him about the boy. "Lucas," I said, my voice breaking. "A homeless child saved me with a single note. A child, living on scraps, had more humanity than the people who should have been my family." The courtroom was silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. The defense tried to argue that Margaret and Harold had been coerced by the criminal ring, that they were victims themselves. But the evidence of their direct involvement was overwhelming. They weren't pawns. They were eager participants. After 2 long weeks, the jury reached their verdict. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy, and financial fraud. Margaret crumpled in her chair, sobbing. Harold cursed loudly, his face red with fury, before the bailiffs restrained him. They were sentenced to life in prison. I thought that would bring closure, but instead, it opened new doors of horror. Under interrogation, Harold cracked. He began naming names: suppliers of poison, corrupt professionals, and enforcers who ensured inheritance acceleration succeeded. Police raids soon followed, sweeping up dozens of people tied to this underground network. But their leader, the one Harold referred to only as the broker, remained out of reach. That shadow lingered like a storm on the horizon, and my father reminded me often, "They may come after you again. Be prepared." In the meantime, I focused on healing. I began renovating the house, not to erase Elena and the children's presence, but to honor them. I framed Sophia's sketches and hung them in the hallway. I placed Ethan's favorite toy castle on the mantel. I kept Elena's photographs where her smile could greet me every morning. These weren't reminders of loss anymore. They were reminders of love. And then came the youth center, with part of the insurance money. I broke ground on what Elena had always dreamed of, a place for underprivileged kids to learn, create, and grow. We called it Elena's Haven. On opening day, the air buzzed with children's laughter. Some painted murals on the walls, others kicked the ball around the yard, and a few sat at desks, already sketching in notebooks. I stood there, watching the joy unfold, and for the first time in months, I felt Elena's presence not as an ache, but as a blessing. It was around that time I sought out Lucas again. I found him near the same alley where we first met, thinner than before, but alive. "You saved my life," I told him, kneeling so we were eye level. "Now let me give you a chance at one." He hesitated at first, wary of promises, but slowly he agreed to come with me. I gave him a room of his own, a warm bed, books, and meals he didn't have to fight for. It wasn't easy. He carried years of hardship in his eyes. But over time, he began to trust. One evening, as we sat together over dinner, he looked up at me and whispered, "Thanks, Dad." The word hit me like a sunrise breaking through endless night. My heart swelled with both sorrow and joy, sorrow that Sophia and Ethan weren't there, joy that maybe, just maybe, I could still be a father. Victor, ever the sentinel, kept watch. He helped me install security cameras, trained me in self-defense, and reminded me constantly to remain vigilant. More than once, he intercepted suspicious activity near my house. Unmarked cars lingering too long, unfamiliar men loitering on the street. Each time, he traced the leads back to remnants of the criminal ring. Arrests followed, piece by piece dismantling the shadows that had nearly claimed me. Through it all, I found strength in the bonds I was rebuilding. In the evenings, Lucas and I would sit together on the porch. I'd tell him stories of Elena's kindness, Sophia's boundless creativity, and Ethan's fearless imagination. Lucas listened intently, sometimes sketching as I spoke, his drawings echoing Sophia's dream. "Life tests us," I told him one night, "the stars glittering above. But we rise stronger, even from the darkest trials." And I realized then that my tragedy, as devastating as it was, had become something more. It was no longer just about grief or betrayal. It was about resilience, about carrying love forward, about turning pain into purpose. The Sinclairs had tried to erase me. Instead, they had ignited a fire I never knew I had. And though the shadows of the conspiracy still lingered, I knew this. I would not live in fear. I would live for Elena, for Sophia, for Ethan, and now for Lucas too. When the gavel struck that final time in the courtroom and Margaret and Harold were sentenced to life, I thought my chapter of suffering was closed. But life rarely works in clean endings. Justice had been served in one sense. Their names disgraced, their freedom stripped. Yet every night I still woke in the dark, reaching for Elena's warmth only to find the cold emptiness of sheets beside me. Every morning, I still heard phantom laughter of Sophia and Ethan echoing in the halls, only to open my eyes to silence. Grief, I learned, does not obey the calendar of justice, but neither does hope. Lucas, the boy who had saved me, was now part of my family. Some nights, he still slept with the lamp on, his body curled tight, as if bracing against a world that had been cruel for far too long. But slowly, he began to trust in safety. He started attending school, sketching in notebooks, and even playing soccer with kids from Elena's Haven. Watching him run across the field, arms flung wide in joy, reminded me of Ethan. It hurt, but it also healed. Victor, my father, remained my anchor. His eyes were tired from years of vigilance, but he never wavered. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching Lucas chase fireflies, he turned to me and said, "Son, what they tried to destroy in you, they failed. You're still standing. And now, you're raising life out of ashes." Those words settled deep in me. For months, I had thought of myself only as a survivor, a man crawling through the wreckage of betrayal and loss. But in that moment, I realized I was becoming more than that. I was no longer defined by the pain inflicted upon me, but by the love I chose to carry forward. The youth center blossomed beyond what I had imagined. Elena's Haven became a hub not only for children, but for families across Providence. Art classes filled with color. Music workshops echoed with laughter. Shelves of donated books became treasure troves for kids who'd never owned one before. And in every corner, I saw Elena's vision alive. But there was still one more step I needed to take. The story of my poisoning, the conspiracy, and the trial had caught media attention. For weeks, my name appeared in headlines. Offers came for interviews, for book deals, even for documentaries. At first, I turned them all down. I didn't want to be defined by tragedy. Then one night, Lucas asked me, "Why don't you tell people what happened? Maybe it'll help them, too." He was right. My silence would only let the story remain in shadows, but my voice could transform it into light. So I agreed to one interview, a televised special. Sitting beneath the bright studio lights, I felt nervous. My palms sweated, my throat went dry. But when the cameras rolled, I spoke. I told the world about Elena, Sophia, and Ethan, their laughter, their dreams, their love. I shared how betrayal had nearly destroyed me, how poison had hollowed my body, how grief had caged my spirit. And then I told them about Lucas. This boy saved me. I said, my voice thick with emotion. A child living on the streets had more courage and compassion than those I called family. He reminded me that love can still find us, even in the darkest alleyways. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from across the country. Survivors of abuse, widows of accidents, children who had lost parents. They wrote to tell me that my story gave them hope, that if I could rise, perhaps they could too. From that moment, my path became clear. I began speaking at schools, community centers, and conferences. Not as a man of tragedy, but as a man of resilience. I told people that grief could break you, but it could also build you. That betrayal could shatter your trust, but it could also sharpen your vision. That love, when carried forward, was stronger than any poison. Lucas often traveled with me, sometimes standing on stage to share his own story. He spoke of hunger, of loneliness, of the note he had slipped into my hand. "I didn't know it would save him," he would say, shyly smiling at the crowd. "I just didn't want him to die." Every time, the audience rose to their feet, tears streaming, hearts moved. And each time, I realized the truth. Lucas had not just saved me. He had given me a new purpose. Of course, shadows still lingered. The broker, the elusive figure at the center of the criminal ring, was never caught. From time to time, whispers of his operation surfaced. Fraud in another state. Unexplained illnesses in wealthy families. But I refused to live in fear anymore. I trusted in the law, in vigilance, and most of all, in the strength I had found through loss. Years passed, and life began to bloom again. Lucas grew into a young man with talent shining through his sketches. He painted a mural on the wall of Elena's Haven, a radiant tree, its branches filled with faces of children smiling, its roots entwined with words. Love never dies. When I saw it, I wept openly. And in time, I allowed my heart to open again, not to replace Elena, for no one ever could, but to honor her by living fully. I met someone gentle and kind, a woman who respected my past and walked with me into the future. Together, we built a home where love did not erase grief, but coexisted with it. Looking back now, I see my story not as one of tragedy, but of transformation. I lost everything that once defined me, my wife, my children, my health, my trust. And yet, through pain, betrayal, and despair, I found something greater. I found resilience. I found purpose. I found that love, once planted, never truly dies. So if you hear my story, I ask you to remember this. When life breaks you, let it also remake you. When betrayal cuts deep, let it sharpen your compassion. When grief weighs heavy, let it teach you the weight of love. Because in the end, we are not defined by what destroys us. We are defined by how we rise. And I rose, not alone, but with Elena's memory, Sophia's laughter, Ethan's imagination, my father's unwavering strength, and Lucas's courage lighting the path forward. That is my redemption. That is my renewal.